Good. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Kate DeConnick. I teach in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies here at USD, and along with Dr. Mike Williams, who's on our call today as well. I'm also the co-director of what's called the Urgent Challenges Collective here at USD. So if you haven't heard about the collective before, this is our initiative on campus that supports research, teaching, and advocacy and community engagement on the issue of homelessness here in San Diego. So today's event that you're joining us for is the first in our spring 2021 speaker series. This event is also co-sponsored by the Changemaker Hub, as well as the USD Just Read program. So yeah, we're really looking forward to our conversation. We're excited also to see such great turnout for today's event. Our focus for today is thinking about this topic of homelessness and racial disparities here in San Diego. And we have a well-qualified and amazing speaker who's going to speak to us about this issue today, Joe Barrett. Just as a reminder, though, with an issue like this that's so complex and has so many facets to it, Joe can't teach us everything that there is to know about this one topic, right, within the course of our hour-long event. So we just wanted to remind our audience members that there are additional kind of reports and resources and things available on the Urgent Challenges Collective website. So if you're interested in learning more about this topic, feel free to explore some of the resources that we have available there. We also just wanted to note at the start of our event today that we have a huge range of different people in our audience today. So we have students, we have faculty, we have staff members. We also have community members and folks from different local nonprofits. We have people from all across the country actually who are joining us for this session today. So we're really excited to be able to learn and kind of engage with one another and to kind of hear the different questions that people have during the question and answer as well. Okay, so in just a minute, I'm going to turn the mic over to Dr. Mike Williams, and he's going to introduce our guest speaker for today. Before I do that, though, I just wanted to share a couple of Zoom kind of etiquette or navigation tips for everyone in our session. So we do have a pretty big group that's going to be joining us for today. A few people will be coming later. We'll probably have about 30 people or so by the time we really get rolling. And as a result, we do ask that you please keep your audio muted during the session unless you're actively chiming in during the Q&A session or something like that. But keeping your audio muted and also your camera off will prevent any lagging in our video for today. Okay, and after our speaker finishes her presentation, we will have time for questions and answers. So we are going to do a kind of moderated question and answer period. And the way that we're going to do this is using a Google Doc that we created for today's event. So to access the Google Doc, what you want to do is you want to navigate to the bottom of your Zoom screen and you want to open up the chat area. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to paste the link to our Google Doc for today's event in that window, and you can type in the doc any questions that you would like our speaker to consider. So our reason for doing it this way is it allows us to kind of see what the questions are, and if people have common questions that someone else asks a question that you're interested in, you can put a star next to it, and that way we know there's a lot of interest in that particular question. Okay, so we'll draw questions from that document during the moderated session at the end. Okay, so that is my framing. I'm going to share the link to that Google Doc throughout our session today in case we have people who are joining us later. But for now, I'm just going to turn it over to Mike Williams, who's going to introduce our speaker, Joe Barrett.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. Thanks for everyone joining us. We are really, really lucky to have Joe Barrett with us today. Joe Barrett is an advocate and leader in the community, providing racial and housing justice through advocacy for the San Diego region. Joe is committed in ending the housing crisis and advocating for adequate, affordable housing. She currently serves as the board of director for the Regional Task Force Continuum of Care Advisory Committee, which provides funding and essential data and insights on the issues of homelessness. She was also co-chair for the Regional Task Force Racial Equity Ad Hoc Committee that focused on addressing the issue of racial disparities, specifically in regards to Black San Diegans experiencing homelessness. Joe is also a member of the Homeless Experience Advocacy and Leadership Network, which the acronym is HEAL, and it's dedicated to elevating the voices of those excluded from the decision-making processes and being a part of the solution in moving agendas forward, building power for low-income and underserved communities. Joe is working to create the systemic change needed to end racial disparities, homelessness, and bringing about positive changes in policies and programs on the local, state, and federal levels. Again, we are thrilled that you're making the time to be with us, Joe, and I know we're all going to learn so much from you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to share my presentation. Okay.
Is it popping up okay for you, Joe?
No, I have it open, so oh, here it is. Darn.
And if you want me to share for you, I have it pulled up on my side.
Yeah,
too. Would
that's
that be
fine.
easier?
Oh yeah, that'd be easier. Thank
Okay.
you.
No problem. I'll share for you. You just let me know when you want me to advance the slides for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, are you able to see it okay?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Oh, you could go to the next slide. Okay. So I did the introduction, and I'm going to do a personal background, a little bit about my career and how I became an advocate. I formerly was homeless after losing my job in 2008 in the last Great Recession. I had a 20-year job making 6 figures for the Boeing company as a business and planning analyst. And because our jobs were government funded, my program got hit. And a lot of, I think we lost a lot through the government on, a lot of people at that time lost their jobs. There was like 1,000 people going after one job. So it was very hard at that time in 2008. And eventually I lost my home. I was living in Riverside, but commuting to work in Orange County. And so after I lost my home, I did come and found another job at Northrop Grumman here, which took 2 years to get, but that's how I ended up in San Diego. And after 2 years after that, they had another budget cut. And so it ended up, I stayed here in San Diego, and my home was upside down, so I couldn't sell it. It went from a $500,000 to 110,000. So there was no way possible that I was able to sell my home. I became homeless and stayed out of my car as I was going to school at UCSD on the paralegal program, and showered at 24-hour fitness. So that's just a little bit about my background and what got me and led me to advocate for those that are hit so hard right now for affordable housing, for racial disparities, and also housing. And so that's just a little bit about my background career. Currently, I'm in training, lobbying for the Housing of California. We're starting our training to lobby with our legislators out of Sacramento. This is my first year, and I'm excited because we're working on about 12 new policies. One being AB 71, and then the one is really big is AB 328 that the Biden administration cut all the private prison funding. So we're advocating or trying to lobby to our legislators to try to get that money put into the affordable housing. And so I hope we can get all that. Tomorrow we have 3 days of training, and it's on March 17, 18, and 19 on lobby day, lobbying those bills. So that's my new advocacy work. Okay, you can, next slide. Okay, so systematic racism is by design. I personally believe that we need to have a frank conversation about racism and how it's affecting people experiencing homelessness. We need to learn to get comfortable with the uncomfortable conversation dealing with racial inequities and disparities with Black people and people of color. My presentation would be on Black history and defining how some of the racial disparities occurred. And so we can start on the next slide. Systematic racism is cumulative and compounding effects of an array of social factors, including the history, the culture, the ideology, interactions and institutions and policies that systematically privilege white people and disadvantage people of color. Next slide. The structural and institutional racism. The racism, a race system designed to build and maintain white supremacy and control of Black and brown bodies that cause trauma. As soon as laws began to ban racial discrimination against Black Americans, white Americans created so-called race-neutral means of maintaining political and economic power. For example, soon after the 15th Amendment granted Black men the right to vote, the white politicians in many states, understanding that recently freed Black Americans were impoverished, implemented poll taxes. So on the slavery, in the 17th and 18th century, which I think is very important, that a lot of people don't understand what really transpired at the beginning. 17th and 18th centuries, Black people were kidnapped in the continent of Africa and sold into slavery. Most slaves ended in the South and tobacco, later cotton plantations. Slavery became an important part of the American economy, and industries became relevant, and slave-produced cotton, and a legal form of property. Slaves were used as collateral in business transactions. In 1865, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, but at Jim Crow, after the U.S. Congress intervened to overturn the Black codes in 1868, most Southern states passed a new Jim Crow law by the 1890s restricting freedoms of Black citizens. These laws, which explicitly restricted voting and official segregation, housing, schools, public facilities, remained in effect until Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act. Next slide. Racial disparities, historically and persistent. Racial discrimination in housing and employment, healthcare, education, criminal justice system, and other systems contribute to high rates of homelessness. African Americans have been excluded from opportunities from home ownership, wealth, accumulation of economic mobility throughout the history of the US. Okay, next slide. Slavery didn't end in 1865, it just evolved. And it was alive and well for the majority of life as a country, and so it is completely fundamental to all the ways of being as a society. And the truth is that slavery didn't end, it just evolved. The ideological of slavery was implicit to the policies that followed it, especially in regards to Black wealth building. Next slide. Racialized policies create steep racial inequities. Racism is fundamental to Americans' inception. Our founding and early economy depended on it. Chattel slavery and genocide of Native people supplied the labor and land of cotton and nation's first economic boom, lucrative exports. The 13th Amendment didn't technically end slavery or involuntary servitude. It's so. Black codes immediately emerged to criminalize legal activity and Black people. This created a new system to convict labor leasing that allowed slaves from former slave owners to again harness free Black labor. And that's when the mass incarceration became about. And the 13th Amendment of the 1865 abolished slavery in the United States, but neither slaves nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime, whereas the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Lawmakers used this phrase to make petty offenses when Black people were found guilty. They were imprisoned and then leased out to the same businesses that lost slavery after passing the 13th Amendment. This made the business of arresting Blacks very lucrative, and hundreds of whites were hired by states as police officers, making their primary responsibility to search out that state for every prisoner who worked for them, also known as prison labor. It is believed that after the passing of the 13th Amendment, more than 800,000 Blacks were part of the system of peonage or re-enslavement through the prison system. Peonage didn't end around 1940 after World War II began. Policymaking since 1970 led to the rise of incarceration with desperate impact of people of color, especially Black Americans. The 1973-1986, the 13th Amendment, a series of policies expanded the use of imprisonment for a variety of felonies. And then 1887 and 1991, sharp growth in state imprisonment for drug offenses. 1994, the three-strike law increased both prison likelihood and significantly lengthened prison sentences. Black male accounts for 34% of the total male prison population and make up 12% of the general population, with Black men making up 48% of that population. Blacks incarcerated at a rate that is 5 times imprisoned of whites. Next slide. Racial disparities in wealth. The average wealth of African Americans with a bachelor's degree or higher is $271,000, is less than of white high school graduates at $368. White households are more likely to be homeowners, 68% in comparison to the 44% of African American households. African Americans made up 55% of the 560K homeless people in the US, while making up to 13% of the general population in the US. Next slide. African American women are twice likely to be unemployed as white workers overall, 66.4% versus 3.1%. African American workers with a college degree are more likely to be unemployed than similarly educated white workers. Next slide. These are all defining how racial disparities are in the US and in California. Systematic racism, systematic and intentional denial of mortgage loans, insurance, and other services on the basis of race and location, creating housing segregation. In the 1930s, government adopted practice of drawing red lines around the neighborhood to deter banks from investing in certain areas based on the race of the people who live there. Color-coded systems, green is the best, yellow is declining, and red is hazardous. Blacks are rated red, mortgage loans and homeowners denied. Whites are labeled green, inspired investment and home ownership. 1968 Fair Housing Act made redlining illegal, but most areas are still low income. Black and brown neighborhoods, homes in Black neighborhoods valued at 25% less than white neighborhoods. Next slide. Racialized policies created steep racial inequities. Black adults are 12% of the US adult, but 33% of the sentence. 3,100 of the US companies benefit from slave labor. And the fractioned ownership of native land. Black people are told about and shown 17 fewer homes than whites. Next slide. Okay, so 40% of people experience homelessness. Of the this is California. So 40% of people experience homelessness, and 6%, they're 6% of the state population. 25% in San Diego are homeless. 30% of that population is in San Diego, in the San Diego County. And currently, the convention center, when COVID started, they put almost, I think it was over 2,000 people in the convention center. There's now about 870 people that are still housed there up until the funding goes until the end of March. So, and then there's almost like 2.2 million people incarcerated in the US, 25% in California, people with the justice system involvement, and that's the Black people, and then 6%, there's 6% of the general population. Next slide. Okay, this is to do with COVID, overrepresentation in essential jobs, yes, expendable. They have access, they have lack of pre-existing medical conditions, disabilities, ability to physically distance. And it really has hit, I think more so, you can go to the next slide because it really tells the data. This is where the data is coming from. Okay, and this comes out of, as of 2/7, I think, I don't know if you can enlarge that, but here it says that the Hispanic and Latino population is really getting hit hard. This is out of the county of San Diego, and it has made up of 56%. The African Americans, these are the deaths from the COVID, and the African American is really like 3.5%. Matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, we share our church with the Hispanic congregation, and we just lost one of our senior pastors to COVID 2 weeks ago. Next page, please. Now, this is the vaccine report that comes out of the county. And as you can see, that whites get 49% of the vaccines that are being given to the population. White people are receiving the coronavirus vaccine at a higher rate than Blacks and Latinos. 45% of the whites and 2.1% of the Blacks. And I think a lot of it, I can't blame this totally on disparities, but I think that most Black people and Hispanics are in the communities that are getting hit so hard. They're not educating the people in that area. And so they're really hesitant to take the coronavirus test. So I can't blame this strictly on, but I think that they do need to do a better job and put the vaccines in the areas that are hit most hardest, which they're not doing right now. So next page, please. Now, in 2000, what was it, 2000, I think it was last year in June, we created, with the Regional Task Force for the Homeless, we created a racial equity committee. And some of our goals, our original goals, was to evaluate and raise awareness to racial awareness, analyze and report impacts of racial inequities, and raise awareness about racial inequities related to homelessness. Next slide. Some of our overreaching vision was that no person in our community experienced homelessness, and the number of Black people experience homelessness, it should be in proportion to that of the general population. We need to understand how institutions and structural racism works to the detriment of people of color. Next slide. And then demand that policymakers at all governmental levels begin to work to put an end to racist policies to dismantle systems of oppression that far too long have allowed the over-policing and divestment for Black communities. The committee will hold public meetings and listening sessions to better understand the experience of Black individuals and households within the homeless service delivery system, including challenges, vulnerabilities, barriers to services, and driving forces for housing instability. Next slide. So our current goals, we have a meeting tomorrow. I'm back on. I'm not one of the chairs, but I'm still back in. with the committee. So their current goals is to analyze existing policies and processes to ensure that they do not create unintentional barriers for people of color to access, engage, and remain connected to housing and other services. Analyzing programs, policies to see if the people are experiencing different results of certain policies or ways they are enforced. Seeking regular training for staff and racial equity inclusion. I think what's important is just understanding, like we said, it should be a comfortable conversation of racism. Racism has stuck its ugly head back up all over the United States. But the next goal was seeking to diversify staff and ensure personnel is as reflective as possible of those experiencing homelessness within their programs. Our regional task force, we had one of the council members, Chris Ward. He was a great person to work with. He was really dedicated to homelessness. And we worked very closely together on a bill. It was bond measure, but it did not reach 75%. We were trying to get it out to taxpayers for the homes, and it didn't make 75% when it got on the ballot. But now, once he left, we have a new chair that is also part of the regional, part of San Diego Housing Commission, which they, you want people with lived experience, you want them at the table to make decision making, because the CEOs, the management, if they haven't been homeless, they really don't know what's needed out there. So that's why they have a lot of people with formerly homeless experience, or even being homeless now, have a seat at the table. But that's been taken away. What they have done is split up the regional task force. The board of directors are on the continuum care side, and then we have a small group of leaderships that make all the decisions, which is not, to me, it's not having us have a voice any longer. But we have to see if we can make some changes on that also and see how well it goes. I think, I don't know what happened. I don't know, it's not full screen anymore. Did there something happen? Oh, shit. Okay, I don't know, okay. It's not full screen. Is there any way you can make it full screen again?
I don't think so, Joe. I'm not sure if you exited on your side, but it's still full screen for me.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, that's all right. Let me see what I did wrong. Oh, full screen standard. Oh, there it goes.
Okay.
Okay, now. Okay, and then I did the seeking the diversity staff and ensure personnel is as reflective as possible of those experiencing homelessness. Next page. So, I think it was been about 2 years ago that the city of San Diego and the regional task force, the city of San Diego put a plan together to address homelessness. And that plan is a 10-year plan. And I think this is going on its second year. And so I think because we're in relation, that plan has something to do with the homelessness. This is just a progress toward goals within reach. So they're goals that decrease unsheltered homelessness by 50%, end veteran homelessness by 44%, and then prevent and end youth homelessness by 37%, decreased by 37% unsheltered youth in homelessness. Next slide. And so to implement and what their goal is to implement the system level approach of homeless planning. And sometimes the systems, they're finding that the systems that are being used is really used as a disparity, some of the systems put into place. So implement City of San Diego Homeless Response Center and systems performance reporting. Implement the coordinated outreach program. And these are all programs that are used in the homeless providers by homeless providers. Develop and provide quarterly reports to community stakeholders on program progress against the plan, and create a communication work group and plan. Next slide. And so create a client-centered homeless assistance system and increase the participation in the system and program planning and feedback by people with lived experience. Analyze the data, identify and determine any potential opportunities to impact the population regarding entry into homelessness. And I just want to say that the regional task force do put out a racial disparity report the last 2 years. It's a report that nobody even looked at until all this racial stuff came about in the last year, Black Lives Matter. So I just, want to say that they've been putting out the report, but nobody really cared about the report. So it's now being addressed. Next page, please. Okay. Increase the production of access to permanent solutions, identify near-term goals, identify current funding projects and pipeline and occupancy timeline at the state and federal level, and identify annual development targets beginning in 2021. Next page. Increase the production again on permanent solutions, work with the community partners to identify potential land property for development, identify single room occupancy properties for preservation, work with the county, state, and local partnerships to identify service funding for permanent supportive housing units to be developed. Next page. Now, these are the two that really are important that we've been advocating as on the racial equity, because the number one is analyze the data, identify and determine the potential opportunity to impact the contribution factors related to disproportionate representation of certain population regarding entry into homelessness. And I don't know why they don't just say disparities. But reduce negative impacts of enforcement and criminal history and people experiencing homelessness, and try and remove any barriers that come up toward obtaining housing, which is another one that we've been fighting for, because most people of color has been in the criminal system. And if you have a criminal record, you're not going to get housed. You can go into affordable, and it starts, those policies start at the government level. HUD is one, and then San Diego Housing Commission, affordable housing. If you go and you have a criminal history, and most people of color or Black people have some type of, I'm not saying everyone, but have some type of criminal history, and they weren't able to find housing, and so they were in a cycle. So some of those things, just like right now with those evictions coming up, we must try to work on those that will have a problem with evictions, because again, HUD will not allow you in unless it's after 7 years. And so you're going to become homeless again, or stay homeless for quite some time and not be able to get housing if you're displaced or unsheltered. Next page. Okay, so that is my presentation. And so if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.